Welcome back to day 2 of the Django Absolute Beginner to Pro course, where we build a complete blog application from scratch. Yesterday, we ran our first Django project, and today we will build our first feature. Today, we will look at the differences between a Django project and Django application. So we'll start from the project we curated yesterday, and we examine the files in this blog project. We will master what a Django app is. We'll look at how to create a Django app. We will define our very first view and see how it works in Django. We will master Django URLs and also see how to connect this app to the Django project we curated yesterday. So this is where we left our blog project yesterday. We are going to start this day 2 by revisiting each file in this blog project. Okay, so yesterday when we generated this project, we got 2 basic things. The first one is this particular directory, which is the actual Python package for our project. Okay, so this is the main package, the main Python package for our project. And the second one is this particular file, which is the manage.py file. Okay, and the manage.py file is a command line utility that lets you interact with Django in various ways. So it's an utility, a command line utility that makes it possible for us to interact with Django in several ways. For instance, yesterday on the command line, we used something like Python manage.py run server. Okay, by the time we are going to be generating our app today, you will also see that we will use this manage.py. So it's simply a command line utility. Okay, now let's examine this directory. Okay, so inside this folder, the first one I want to call your attention to is this init. Okay, this init file. This is simply an empty file. If you click on this, it's an empty file that tells Python that this directory should be considered a Python package. Next, let's look at this settings.py. Just as I mentioned yesterday, the settings.py is going to host all our configurations. So all the settings or configuration for our project. Okay, then we have this urls.py, which we actually said that this handles the URL. This is where we are going to do something like URLs declarations for our project. And we have this asgi.py, which is an entry point for ASGI compatible web servers to serve our project. Okay, so this ASGI and WSGI, they are just entry points for servers. And we will look at them more in the right use case. And when we ran the server yesterday, we got this DB file. This is the default database that Django uses. So by default, Django uses the SQLite database. And later we will see how we can actually configure our project to use either MySQL or other database. For now, I don't want to bore you with more of these theories. We will get to see this in action. Now, the next thing we are going to do is to create our first Django app. What exactly is Django app? A Django app is simply a web app that does something. Okay, it's like a Python package or simply a folder with Python files that contains one part of your website. Okay, this can be something like a blog, a contact form, user detail, a shopping cart. It's not your whole website, so it's just like a piece of it, a piece of your website. Now, in order for us to understand this better, let's look at a real world analogy. Think of a Django project. So in our case, we have this project as a university, and each app is a department. So we can have the blog department, the users department, the shopping cart department, others department, and more. That means that a particular Django project can contain as many apps as possible. Okay. Also, an app can be in a multiple projects. Okay, and this means that Django allows us to reuse apps across projects. We will talk more on this later. Now, let's see how we can actually create a Django app. And before we do that, just like what we did yesterday, we moved into a virtual environment. And yesterday, we actually created that virtual environment. Currently, if you look at my terminal, here you see this base. So we need to do what we did yesterday. On a Mac, you can simply use source, okay? Then you type virtual, which is this particular directory, virtual env/bin/activate, okay? And you can hit enter. Now you see we are currently in our virtual environment. And on Windows, remember, type virtual env, then instead of / you use \scripts, okay, \activate. So you use this particular command if you're on Windows, and you use the first one if you're on Mac. Great. Now that we are in our virtual environment, we can now move into this blog project. So we can say cd blog project, hit enter. So currently we are inside the blog project. You can confirm this by typing ls if you're Mac or dir if you're on Windows. So you see that we are in the right directory. Okay, so we have these three things here. Great. Now let's see how we can create a Django app. To create a Django app, we simply type python manage.py start app, and next you need to specify the name of the app. For now, let's use blog. So you have python manage.py. Remember we said the manage.py is a command line utility. Okay, so start app blog, hit enter, and this is going to generate another new folder called blog. Okay, now you see this particular new folder called blog. Great. And here is our blog application. So this is how we can create a Django app. Okay. Now let's actually look at the contents of this particular folder. Okay. Inside this blog folder, we have this migrations folder. And this migrations folder is going to track changes we make to our models. We will understand what this is very soon. Then we have this init.py file that actually tells Python that this folder is actually a Python package. Okay, consider this folder a Python package. We have admin.py, and admin.py is simply a Python file. Okay, whenever we have .py is Python extension. So admin.py is simply a Python file that configures how models show up in our Django admin. We will see what Django admin is very soon. Okay, then we have apps.py. Django uses this to actually identify the app. Okay, it uses this to identify the app. We have models.py, which is where our data models, that is the database tables, will live. Okay, so the database tables are going to live inside this particular file. We have test.py, which is for writing tests. We have the views.py, which is where our logic goes. We will use these views in a moment. Okay. Okay, so before I talk more on how everything here works, let's actually register this application. Okay, so creating this blog app doesn't mean Django knows about it. We need to explicitly tell Django about this application by registering this application inside this particular project. Okay, so we have to go to our project, and inside our project we need to go to the settings.py, and here we have to search for what we called installed app. Okay, so we have to search for where that is, installed apps. here we need to add the new app we just created. Later in the course, we'll look at these default apps one after the other. But now here, we need to add our app, and we call this blog, okay? This is how we register our app. Save this file. Please note that Django only loads the apps listed here. So Django will only load the apps listed here. So if we like, we should create as many apps as we want here. If we do not register them here, Django will not load it, okay? So in order for our app to be loaded, we need to add that particular application here, okay? Great. Now that we've registered our app, before we look at Django architecture, let's actually see how we can create our first view, okay? So next, we are going to see how to create view in Django. You can close this settings.py. We are done for now. So let's go back to our app. And inside this app, I want us to move to views. What is a view? A view is simply a Python function that takes a request and returns a response. Okay, so when a user visits a page in our website, Django runs the function we are going to add here and returns what to display in the browser. So for now, let's see a view as a simple Python function. Here, we are going to add a Python function. Okay, so for this first function, let's call it index. And remember, we said that a view is simply a Python function that takes in what? It takes in request. Okay, so this is going to take a request and we simply return a response. And for now, we are going to be making use of the HTTP response. So here, let's say from Django.http import HTTP response. Okay, and for now, don't disturb yourself about this. We are going to get detailed explanation of each of these things later in the course. But for now, let's actually return this HTTP response. And here we simply say, hello from Django, let's say day 2. Okay, so we define a function, and this particular function takes in a request and basically returns a response. And that actually is what Django view is. Okay, so for now we are returning a simple text. Next, we want to see how we can access this particular text in our web browser. And to access this view in a web browser, we need to map this view to a URL. Okay, we need to map it to a URL. We need to define a URL configuration. And this URL configuration must be defined inside our Django app. So it has to be defined inside this blog app, okay? And if you look at the files we have in our blog app, there is no URLs, okay? That means we need to add this file ourselves. So inside this blog folder, let's add a file. And let's simply call this urls.py, okay? So we create this particular urls.py file inside our blog app. And now we want to map these views to this particular URL. So to do that, first we need to import something from Django.urls. So we say from Django.urls, we want to import path, okay? So we are going to import path. And also, we need to import this view, okay? Remember, we said we are mapping the views to URL. So we have to import the views, okay? And as we can see, the views and the URLs are actually on the same level. So we can simply say from dot import views, okay? So we've imported these views into the URLs. Now we need to map the views to the URLs, and we simply use what we call URL patterns, okay? And we set this equal to, So here we are going to use this path and we are going to call this, because this is simply a function, okay? And it is a function that expects at least two arguments. The first one is the route, and the second one is the view, okay? This particular view we are importing. So first we need to specify the route, and for now this is going to be empty. And next we need to specify the view, okay? Here we use views, and inside these views we have our index, okay? So this particular index is coming from this, it's coming from the views, the function we defined here. And also we can add another thing here using name, and we'll set this equal to index, okay, which is this index, the name of the view. Let's save this, okay? So what have we done? We imported the views, we defined a list, okay? This is simply a Python list. We defined a list called URL patterns. And here we called the path function, which we imported from Django.urls, and we passed in the routes. In this case, we used an empty string, which actually means that the view handles the home page of the app. So we created our first view and we mapped it to a URL. The next thing we need to do is to now connect this app URL to the main project URL, okay? So we need to connect the app URL to our project. Remember, this is a department. The department now has its own URL. We need to tell the university about this department URL, okay? So we just have to connect our app URLs to the main project. And we do that by, let's close our app. Now go back to our blog project. So inside this blog project, we have urls.py. By default, the project itself has its own URLs. And you see here we have URL patterns, which is exactly what we used here. Look at the one we created here. We use this URL patterns, which is actually a Python list, okay? So now we need to register this guy. We need to register it here. So we can come here and we say path, okay? And here we are going to use an empty route for now. And next we need to call a particular function called include, okay? And we are going to be importing this include also from Django.urls. So here we can say comma and we can just write include, okay? This include function actually allows us to make reference to other URL configuration, okay? So here now we can reference our blog.urls, okay? So this here simply tells Django to use the blog URL, okay? And this blog is our app, right? Great. Now it is time to run the server and test what we have done, okay? Okay, so now let's go back to our terminal. We can lift this up a little bit, okay? Great. Now let's run the server, and we run the server just as we did yesterday using Python manage.py run server. Great. And now our development server is actually running on localhost port 8000. You can copy this to your web browser, or you directly press down command and click on this. And here you see we have hello from Django day 2. Congratulations, you have created your first Django app, and now you understood Django's app structure. You wrote your first view, okay? So we saw that a view is simply a Python functions that take in request and returns a response, okay? So you created your URL routing for your app. When you create a Django app, you need to create a URL routing for that particular app. So you've done that today. And you connected your app URLs to the main project URL. And finally, you saw your own message in the browser. This is a great one, and I am so happy about this. Next, we are going to see and understand the Django architecture and pattern. Django uses the MVT pattern, the model view template. Tomorrow, we will understand this architecture and we will see how Django actually works in general. Then, we will move into Django template and how to display dynamic data. Then we will learn about models, how to define data, how to create database tables, and use Django's ORM to work with data effortlessly. Please take your time. You can go through what we've done again. I will always advise you to visit the documentation, okay? Visit the documentation. Try to do everything we've done today on your own. If you have any question or suggestion, do not forget to reach me through the comment section. Thank you for being part of this video. See you in the next one, and one love.